In this video, I'm going to restore this Stanley Bailey No.4 hand plane that I bought for around £10 on eBay a couple of years ago. The good thing about old tools like this is that while some people might consider them junk or useless, with a bit of TLC, we'll be able to get this thing back in good working order. As you can see, it's pretty old and rusted, and at the moment it doesn't really cut very well. To start with, I want to strip the plane down to its component parts and see if there are any major issues, and it was mostly okay, just a lot of rust and dirt. But the plane iron is a little bit bent, so I'll need to address that at some point. I'll try to give as much detail as I can in this video, but I'm no expert. If you do want a full step-by-step guide, then I can highly recommend Paul Seller's YouTube video where he goes into exquisite detail on restoring one of these, as well as how to set it up so that it performs perfectly. After stripping it down, I got to work scrubbing off all of the loose dirt and removing some old sawdust and cobwebs, but not any of the rust just yet. I just want to get it clean before the next step, which is putting it into a bath of rust remover. This only works on the rust, so if I leave a ton of other dirt on there, it'll just get in the way and muck up the rust remover. I'm not exactly sure how this stuff works, I could probably Google it, but it's really effective, and it means I don't have to spend absolutely ages sanding and brushing off tons of rust. I just put it in here, leave it overnight, and the next day, as if by magic, the rust is gone. After a quick rinse to wash off any remaining rust remover, I can start giving everything a proper polish with some Scotch-Brite pads, and it's at this point everything starts to look a lot better. I actually looked up Scotch-Brite pads after I did this step because I'd seen other people use them and they seemed a bit more forgiving for cleaning and polishing than sandpaper. Turns out there's actually 7 different colours, and the maroon ones I'm using here are for fine finishing and paint keying. I think technically I should have had some dark or light green ones which are for heavy duty cleaning and oxide removal, but I don't think it matters all that much. I did use some sandpaper for a couple of stubborn bits like this paint, but luckily there wasn't too much of this. When I got to tackling this bent plane iron, I remember seeing a trick on one of Paul Seller's videos where he took a hammer and used it to just gently hit the plane iron against a flat surface, and it turns out it's a pretty effective way to straighten it. At this point, everything was starting to look a lot cleaner, and I was keen to see how the plane cut. So I gave it a quick sharpen, put everything back together, giving it a little oil everywhere to stop the rust from returning, and already there's a big difference. But I'm not quite done yet. There are a few extra modifications I want to make which will help this plane function better. So the next step, now that the plane is clean, is making sure that the sole of the plane is flat. Ideally, I'd use a perfectly flat piece of granite or something similar, but I don't own one, so I'm using this piece of melamine instead, which is close enough for my needs. I just clamped a piece of sandpaper to the melamine and ran the fully assembled plane back and forth over it until I got a nice, flat, smooth sole. Once I'm done with the sole, I move on and repeat the same process on the sides. I've toyed with the idea of making videos for a while now, and I finally decided to give it a go this year. I love making things, including videos and woodworking, so I thought, why not combine the two? The first step was building this workshop I'm in here, and even though it's not finished yet, I'm so glad to have a space I can come and work and keep all of my tools clean, organised, and importantly, out of our spare bedroom. While I was flattening the sole, there was another tip I learned from Paul Sellers where he takes a ruler or similar thin straight edge and uses it to just ease the edges of the sole of the plane so it's not quite as sharp and won't mar the wood that we end up planing. It doesn't really show up that well on camera, but there is a slight easing to the edges of the plane now. Once I'd done that, I just did a little more freehanding it this time, just to ease the transitions between the sole and the sides of the plane. Now this shouldn't affect the performance of the plane in any way, it just makes the whole thing a little bit softer and nicer to use. I also want to ease the edges on the toe and the heel of the plane, and to do this I'm going to secure it in the vise, making sure not to have it too high, otherwise I'd risk breaking some of the thinner parts of the body of the plane. I make sure that it's nice and low, and then just use a flat file to do the same process as before. Now, because these edges will regularly move back and forth over a piece of wood, I'm making these chamfers a little more extreme. I mentioned earlier about starting to make videos, and restoring this plane seemed like a good first video because although I already have a few planes, I don't actually have a good No.4, and I thought this would be a nice introduction to making videos like this and would lead nicely onto some of the projects I want to use it for. Okay, so for these next steps, I'm going to take the plane apart again, and now we're going to sharpen the blade properly. I started by just working up through the different grits of my diamond stones on the flat side of the blade, making sure that it was nice and flat. Then I flipped it over and got it into a honing guide to start working on the bevel. This was the longest part of the process as the existing edge was pretty beaten up and out of square, so it was a lot of material to remove and get it into good shape. On the plus side, I find it quite therapeutic having such a simple and repetitive task to complete, as it doesn't take much brain power and it's also a good chance to listen to audiobooks or podcasts. I did miss a little bit on the bevel, but it's not near the cutting edge and it won't really matter all that much, as it doesn't affect how this thing cuts. Once I'd got the blade mostly sharpened, I did something similar to what I did on the sole of the plane, which was to just ease the corners on the edge of the blade. I just tipped the honing guide slightly to lift one corner off at a time. This will make it so that the blade won't dig in on those edges and put big scratches into a piece of wood. Again, it's tricky to see on camera, but hopefully you get the idea. After that, it was just a case of using a strop to polish the flat side and the bevel, and the blade is ready to go. Now, when I got to this cap iron, I noticed that it was actually very out of square, and I wasn't really sure what to do about this as the whole bend was out of square. If anyone has any suggestions on how to fix this or whether I even need to fix it, then let me know. For now though, I decided not to worry about it too much and just make sure that the surface that contacts the blade was good and flat. Then I gave the cap iron a polish on the strop too, and it was time to put the plane back together. This video was actually filmed in a couple of halves, and the eagle-eyed among you may have noticed that the workshop has changed a bit from start to finish. I think I did a pretty good job of matching the two halves, but bonus points if you can spot the exact moment where time skips forward a few weeks. Anyway, that's this plane pretty much finished for now. I might make some new handles for it at some point in the future, but for now, I just wanted to get this thing clean and sharp again, which I think you'll agree it is. Oh, and to make sure this thing cuts more than just a thin piece of pine, I also tried it on a gnarly piece of oak, which I think it handled very well. Anyway, that's all for this video. Thanks for watching.